Chapter 17. The Rich Get Richer. Yet again, Silatra was behind bars. Naira groaned, rolling over on the bed they'd provided for her. For her frustration, it was more comfortable than her bed back home, and she felt more rested than she had in ages. That didn't change the fact that she was stuck in a holding cell. A small window high in the wall let dim sunlight into the room. Brushing her hair out of her face, Naira rubbed at her eyes and let out a yawn. She winced as her hands began to sting. Both were in rough condition. Her right hand was still recovering, where a bullet had torn a hole through the flesh between her thumb and index finger, while her left hand was still bruised from where Renetta had smashed it with the bat. Curum had been helping to promote the healing and numb the pain, but she didn't have any more on her. What little she'd brought to this place had been used to heal Renetta's foolish child from her fractal high. To add insult to injury, they'd confiscated her bag. Not that the single remaining Necrom crystal or the Aurum crystal would have helped her break out of this room. Getting out of bed, Naira started pacing the room to take her mind off her stinging hands. The pacing only kind of helped, though, since her toes and shins had also taken some severe bruising from the highway chase the night before. Forcing her thoughts away from her pain, she noted that this cell was larger than any cell she'd ever been stuck in before. Perks of privatization of security, apparently. Even so, it was still pretty bare. Her room had a bed, a toilet, a sink, a mirror, a window just out of reach, 3 concrete walls, and a wall of bars. Minimal as it was, what the room had was luxurious. The bed was reminiscent of the hotel beds she'd gotten to use the one time that the university had sent her along on a conference. The sink here was pristine and large enough for her to at least rinse her hair in. The mirror was set behind a thick pane of glass, no doubt to prevent even the temptation of breaking it. And the toilet even had a thin privacy wall. It left her face and feet exposed, but it protected her modesty, something she especially valued when guards came to check on her. Striding over to the window, she leapt for it. Her fingers caught on the windowsill, and her hands' anger intensified at her continued disregard for their comfort or well-being. After a few moments of her feet scrabbling to find purchase on the wall, she managed to pull herself up enough to glimpse out the window. It was a simple pane of glass, no taller than the width of her hand. The grass, trees, sunlight, and rain she saw beyond helped to calm her, even as she had to admit there was no way for her to squeeze through. Letting herself back down, she dropped the handful of inches back down to the floor and dusted off the front of her shirt and jacket. They'd frisked her last night, but at Renetta's order, they'd let her keep all her clothes. Hadn't stopped Madame 13 from throwing in a quip about Naira finding her own pants optional. Seed mother, that woman was petty and insecure about the weirdest things. Following the walls, she checked for seams or cracks. This room looked new, like she was the first person to ever use it. She tested each bar, individually in turn, but they were solidly set in the concrete. They didn't even rattle until she reached the door, but its hinges were new and tight, so it didn't rattle much either. The gaps here were narrower than the window, so she wouldn't be able to slip out the bars. Naira paced the cell for what felt like an hour. She did a simple workout to take her mind off her situation and check the actual state of her body. Push-ups sucked because of her hands, but her arms were in good condition. Sit-ups were a bit touchy, so she still had a sore rib or two. And she did so much walking while she waited that her legs and feet were apparently fine. Eventually, someone brought food. A bowl of granola with cranberries and raisins, an individual carton of milk, and a pacifier. Naira had forgotten that she'd compared Renetta's whining to that of an infant. Apparently, Renetta had not forgotten. Few combinations were more frightening to Naira than a politician with a natural inclination to hold grudges. Still, he wasn't dead, and she hadn't been turned over to the police, so that was reason to be thankful. The thankfulness didn't last. Naira was in here because she failed. The safety of the only people who still mattered to her had been dependent on her ability to follow instructions. How long until people figured out that Renetta was still alive? How long until that woman's overconfidence destroyed the ruse Naira had worked so hard to publicize? What would happen to Naira's family then? The thought murdered her appetite, but she made herself finish the food anyway. She would need to keep up her strength. Silatra couldn't be caged forever. Eventually, Lightning had to be released. When she finished, the guard insisted on taking her bowl and spoon. What? Did he think she could dig through concrete with fired porcelain and a flimsy piece of pre-stressed metal? She relinquished them anyway. No sense in giving her captors reason to dislike or distrust her. Not until it was too late for them to stop her. The hours dragged on. Naira checked her wristwatch every once in a while, but it was running low on electrum and visibly slowing down, so she didn't completely trust the time it read. Taking a seat on the floor, she rested her head back against the bars, gazing up towards the sunlight refracting through the droplets of water coating the window, towards the unreachable freedom it represented. Every now and again, thunder cracked, though she saw no flash of lightning. Her body and mind both screamed for activity, but what was the point? The best she could do now was learn how things ran around here, lull everyone into a false sense of security, and wait for an opportunity to escape. The longer that opportunity delayed, the more danger her family was in. Danger they only faced because of her decision to spare a life, the life of someone who had betrayed her kindness. She snorted at that. Had she really grown so desensitized that locking someone in her basement was her new definition of kindness? She had at least fed her and left her with a few common courtesies. Her musing was interrupted by someone she hadn't heard enter the room. "Do you want a chair or something?" Glancing over her shoulder, Naira saw a young, sneppered girl in bright orange baggy pants that screamed for attention. She wore a tank top, but had pulled both straps to the same shoulder. Fashion had definitely gotten weirder since Naira was that age. Naira shrugged. "I wouldn't say no to a chair. Though, are you going to just tell me to use the bed?" The girl rolled her eyes. "You can sit wherever you want. I'm just appalled at the way my mother's treatment implies that we're barbarians in this house." It was good to see that Naira's treatment of this girl hadn't been a waste. "Glad to see you on your feet, Miss Moira." The girl froze. "You know my name?" Naira smirked. "Yes, your mother told me." "What?" The response was clearly involuntary, and she seemed genuinely surprised. Then she snorted. "I'm surprised she remembered it. Don't think I've heard her use it in months." She trailed off, gaze wandering back the way she'd come. Naira took a moment to look the girl up and down. Moira was shorter than her already short mother, though not by much. While she certainly wore the expressions of a teenager, her stance bore a confidence she clearly had picked up from her mother. Her hands were firmly planted on hips that poked out above the pants. Seriously, didn't wearing something so baggy just increase the risk of it falling down? Clothing shouldn't require extra effort and attention to keep on. Moira glanced back at her with a look that was used to getting its way. "Well, I want to talk, and I want a chair. Should I grab one for you too, or are you going to be stubborn and keep sitting on the floor?" Naira chuckled at that. Aggressive politeness was an amusing combination. "I'll take a chair." Moira's face softened, and she smiled with the childlike innocence Naira hadn't seen from anyone in a while. With a quick nod, Moira bounded back up the stairs. A few minutes later, she returned with a folding chair under each arm. Passing one through the bars for Naira, she set up her own on her side and took a seat. Her feet didn't quite reach the floor, though her tube-like tail certainly did. Naira unfolded the chair she'd been given, noting it was the expensive kind that had a cushion on the seat and along the back. This was nicer than what they used at the university. On the other side of the bars, Moira's hands fidgeted in her lap. "I have a lot to say to you, but I don't know your name. Mom and the others have a different term for you. But it bothers Sergei, so I refuse to use it. What should I call you?" The girl was clearly nervous, but charged ahead anyway. It was a good trait to have, one that had taken far too long to pound into her own boys. She smiled. "Call me Naira." "Naira?" Moira twirled her fingers, prompting for more. "Just Naira." Moira gave a slow nod. I like it. Sounds kind of like my name, though it sounds cooler in your accent. Raising an eyebrow, Naira noted, I don't think I've ever received a compliment on my accent before. Moira looked genuinely shocked. Well, that's a crime. Your accent's very pretty. So she was as much a flatterer as her mother. Child of a politician. The apple certainly didn't fall far from the tree. And now the girl was staring at her, which wasn't helping the feeling of being a caged animal. Have I got something on my face? Moira started, and her tail, which had been tracing small swishes on the ground behind her, now hung still. Sorry, I was just admiring the makeup. It's a lovely design. Naira laughed. I don't use makeup. Too rich for my blood. Hearing this, Moira's eyes widened in wonder. Really? So the dark accents around your eyes? Natural. Wow, was all the girl managed in response. Naira reached up to gently tug at a crimson feather in one of her braids. So I find cheaper ways to make myself look nice. The conversation lingered here for a few minutes. Moira was far more interested in Naira's sense of fashion than she was, but the girl was so enthused that Naira couldn't bring herself to shut it down. She didn't need to, as Moira eventually changed the subject herself. It seems I owe you twice, Naira. Naira raised an eyebrow before asking. And why is that, Miss Moira? The girl's face became a battlefield of emotion then, and she looked like she was experiencing all of them at once. Sergei says you saved my life. Naira snorted. That's dramatizing it, I'm afraid. All I did was treat your symptoms, so you wouldn't wake up with the worst headache of your life. Well, it's still appreciated. I don't like headaches. In that case, I'd steer clear of Fractal in the future, Naira said, feeling her own grin more in her voice than in her face. Moira's whiskers twitched, and she scowled at that. I didn't take it because I wanted to. She fidgeted as Naira's eyebrow lifted again. Then the girl added, I mean, I wanted to try it, but just a little. I didn't want to get high. I just thought... Moira shook her head. It's stupid. Folding her hands in her lap, Naira crossed her legs, propping an arm on the back of the chair. She had nothing but time. Moira hemmed and hawed for a few more moments before blurting, Look, when I thought my mom was dead, I didn't want to believe it. She's always been really good about poking in her nose whenever I was getting in trouble. It's like she knows, like she's psychic or something. Chuckling, Naira said, It's a mom thing. Not sharing in her amusement, Moira snorted. Well, frankly, it feels like an invasion of privacy. She was always so good at catching me at the worst possible moment, I thought... She trailed off, the kneading motion of her fingers seemingly mimicked in the expressions of her face. It was like a way to see if she was really gone. Like if I did something really bad, she'd come back from the dead just to chew me out. And... Brack. It sounds so stupid to say it out loud. If it had been her boys, Naira would have grabbed the bar of soap for the swear. Even now, she was shocked that that was the first place her mind went. Her boys had been adults since... She clamped down on the thought, forcing her mind back to the conversation at hand. Thinking about Taz and Rin right now could break her facade. With a shake of her head, she offered a small smile. That sounds like a pretty normal response to me. Grief leads people to do weird things. And you would know? Moira snapped. She softened almost immediately. Sorry, I'm sure you probably do. It's been a rough couple of days, and I shouldn't take it out on you, or anyone. If anything, I should be happy that everything's okay. Naira snorted. If everything's okay, then why am I locked up? Rolling her eyes, Moira replied, Because my mother's a control freak with trust issues. Her most common solution when she thinks she can't control me is to lock me in my room, too. Then she gestured at the bars. Not that it's the same, exactly, but I kinda get it. This sweet child had no idea what it truly meant to lose your freedoms to a room with bars. Even this was far kinder than the cages of Salatra's youth. So Naira ignored the attempted empathy. Your mother is okay with you coming to speak to me? Moira smirked. I didn't ask, and I don't intend to. She's not the boss of me. I am. Not far from the tree, indeed. Though it wasn't like Naira was any different. Well then, Miss Moira, if you're the one calling the shots, what is it that brings you down here? Chair leg scraped on concrete as Moira fidgeted in her seat. There's a lot of answers to that question. Gratitude, guilt, curiosity. With which would you like to start? Moira's face scrunched up again, and she tucked her hands under her legs. Gratitude, I think. Up until this morning, I thought my mom was dead. She said that she's alive because of you. Naira's mouth tweaked into a wry smile. Yes, well, it was more convenient to keep her alive than to kill her. And she frowned. Actually, that's not true at all. It was quite inconvenient. I had to drive her all the way from District 4 to District 11 on a hoverbike without letting her fall off, while my right hand was bleeding from a gunshot wound. Then, when I tried to keep her in my basement, she made a terrible mess of things and flooded the place. Her attempt at a humorous retelling did little to change Moira's shocked expression. She was about to offer a quaint apology when the girl cut in. You can drive a hoverbike? The enthusiasm caught Naira so off guard that the answer took a moment to form. Yes. How'd you get the license? Moira leaned forward enough that her toes finally reached the floor. Mom had to spend a lot of money, wade through paperwork and jump hoops just to get Sergei into a driving program. And that was just to train him for the test for his chauffeur's license. So how'd you get one? Naira grinned, then leaned closer to the bars, beckoning with a finger. Moira leaned in to match, and Naira could have grabbed her through the bars if she'd wanted. This was a naive, sheltered child indeed. Dropping her voice to a whisper, Naira's reply was simple. I didn't, she said with a wink. You don't have a license? Moira hissed back. Then how'd you learn to drive a hoverbike? I may have had a lot of practice on stolen hoverbikes when I was your age. The reaction was so immediate, Naira couldn't doubt its sincerity. The eyes of the impressionable girl before her lit up so much, Naira almost thought she could make out residual traces of prism in their sparkle. You stole? Then Moira dropped her voice back to a more conspiratorial level. You stole hoverbikes? What, did you sell them or something? Raced them, actually. Naira tried to suppress her grin for dramatic effect, but the wonder in Moira's eyes was infectious. In fact, the girl was leaning so far forward, Naira was worried she might fall out of her chair. Why is the coolest person I've ever met locked in my mother's basement? Naira chuckled wryly. An excellent question. Can we be friends? Naira's grin faded, and she tilted her head without thinking about it. What? Look, I know my mother's a piece of work, but her issues are not my issues. More importantly, you're like 1,000 times cooler than she is. You raced stolen hoverbikes as a teenager? And aren't you some, crazy alchemist person, too? Sergei said you used some crystal magic something or other to treat me. And Mom said you were making fire and lightning shoot out of your hands. Can you really do that? Renetta was ignoring a gold mine. Normally, kids hit these levels of excitement earlier in life. But if Moira had been cooped up and sheltered until now, no wonder she was excited by anything that was a new experience. A small smile, almost apologetic, came to Naira's lips. I can, though you make it sound much easier than it is. Alchemy is equal parts science, math, and gut feel. There's a lot more involved than just shooting lightning and fire. Moira leaned forward to grip the bars. We have to be friends. Naira needed an opportunity to get out of this place. She doubted she was going to find a better opportunity than an excited, naive teenage girl. Her conscience pricked her a bit when she realized she was considering taking advantage of such an innocent youth. That said, life had harsh lessons to dole out, and anything Naira taught her could only help her in the end. So reaching out to lay a hand over Moira's clenched fingers, she took on a smile that was only partly forced. I'd like to have a friend. It seemed like a full week passed before 16:30 rolled around and Tolson could finally clock out. Melissa had managed to take the day off on short notice, staying with Leo at the hospital. That's where Tolson wanted to be right now. He should be with his friends, but his uncle had insisted that he work today. Considering that it was Uncle Walter's last day as chief of the District 3 precinct, it wasn't a good day to skip out. Paul and Edson passed him in the hall, and he took a second to joke with them about the pastry thief they'd nabbed that afternoon. They were in good spirits, and despite his fears, so was he. Jenna, from HR, crossed his path a minute later, so he complimented her on her new earrings. She beamed at him. Apparently, he'd been the only one to notice. Punching his card in the time clock, he stepped into the locker room. Harrison stood at the courtesy phone on the wall, no doubt talking to his wife. Apparently, their kits had a soccer game tonight. Tolson deposited his extras in his locker, tucking his nightstick in the gap between 3 boxes of assorted granola bars and the poncho he kept here for storm days. His can of pepper spray slid in beside it. The magnet on the back of his badge clicked as he stuck it to the inside of the locker door. Hand on the sidearm holstered at his hip, he considered leaving it here. His plan was to go see Leo after this, and Leo was already nervous enough simply by being in a hospital. Bringing a gun might just send him over the edge. That said, someone had also tried to blow Leo up in his own car. Miss Naira had suspected alchemical sabotage, and she was too cool not to trust. So if someone wanted Leo dead, then Tolson felt it was probably best to remain armed. Swapping for a shoulder holster, Tolson pulled out his academy jacket, zipping it up enough to hide the straps and the gun. What Leo didn't know wouldn't hurt him. If anything, it might keep him safe. People these days weren't safe in their own private towers, so what kind of protection was a public hospital going to hold? At least Melissa was with Leo right now, so he had someone keeping an eye on things. Harrison finished his phone call and rushed out the door. Tolson offered a quick salutation, but it went unheeded. A few moments later, Harrison burst back into the locker room. Forgot that I left my wallet in my work pants. Need your code? No, Harrison growled as he cradled the combination lock on his locker. After several failed attempts, he sighed. Combination's in my wallet, and having just used it 5 minutes ago, I thought I remembered. But I can't remember if it's a 7 or a 17. With a grin, Tolson said, It's 6, 17, 34. Harrison scowled a bit, but tried the combination. It worked. His scowl disappeared as he shook his head and dug inside for his wallet. Thanks, Tolson. I'm supposed to be picking up food for everyone, and I'm already late. You know how Liz gets when she's hungry. Anytime, Tolson said. And yeah, Liz makes my appetite look tame. Harrison snorted and relocked his locker. Raising an eyebrow, he turned to Tolson. How did you know my code? I'm training to be part of the new psychic division, Tolson said, wiggling his fingers in the air. So I dug it out of your subconscious. The honest and boring answer was that Harrison had developed the habit of reading his code out loud when he entered it into the lock. But that wasn't nearly as fun to admit. As it was, his answer earned him an eye roll. No wonder you're still single, Tolson. True, Tolson admitted. Most girls don't like it when you narrate their deepest thoughts to them. That sounds like a nightmare. I wouldn't want to know what Liz is thinking most times. It's probably some internal debate about whether she can actually wait for food, or if she needs to start eating me to avoid starvation. Next time she swings by the station, I'll listen in and let you know. Harrison snickered as he walked to the door. Just make sure you tell her to her face. I want to be there when she kills you. Night, Harrison! And good luck to your kits! Harrison waved and left the room. With a grin, Tolson closed his locker. Then he ran down the checklist to get a count. Of the several hundred lockers in here, he had the combinations to nearly 24. He needed to step up his game. If he learned more, he might actually be able to start a rumor about being psychic. Last order of business, congratulating his uncle on the promotion. As he approached the chief's office, the blinds were drawn. Opening the door without knocking, he discovered why. A necral cloud hung thick in the air. Uncle Walter had pulled out a celebratory cigar. A large ball of ice sat at the bottom of a glass of whiskey on his uncle's desk. His uncle was standing by the desk, cigar tucked into a corner of his mouth, as he sorted through folders that bulged with papers. Glancing around the room, all of the posters and paintings had been taken down. The service awards had been boxed up, along with the photos of Uncle Walter's family and friends. That was probably for the best. The picture with Tolson and his parents was over a decade old, and people around the station liked to give him grief for the braces he'd had back then. Joke was on them, his smile was immaculate now. Looking back at the desk, Tolson realized he'd missed one. A small photo sat in a simple frame several feet away from where the chief was working. The photo was from his uncle's installation, and it showed him firmly shaking hands with an eager Minister of Justice, Robert Paddock. Paddock had the type of politician's smile that made Tolson's skin crawl, but he was a longtime family friend, especially with Uncle Walter. Of the times Tolson had met the man, he'd done his best to be polite and friendly. The minister was friendly in return, but interactions with him were still just off. Now that Uncle Walter was leaving, Leo was going to be expected to report to Paddock. Tolson would have to find a way to go with him for moral support. "Need something, Officer Gray," his uncle said around his cigar. Collating a stack of papers, he deposited them wholesale into a metal wastebasket beside his desk. He kept working without even looking up at Tolson. Tolson forced himself to take the treatment with a chuckle. "That's what I love about my family. Major promotion, big cause for celebration, and we still charge stoically on like robots. No longer chief, and you're still clinging to the formalities. A man of firm convictions and an inspiration, sir." Tolson's hand shot to his forehead in mock salute. A stapled report crinkled as the chief crumpled it between clenched fingers. His claws left furrows in some papers beneath them. "If you want something, just say it, Tolson. As soon as I'm finished here, I'm going home." Among his siblings and cousins, there was a nickname for his uncle, Uncle Wilter. It took all of 5 minutes of meeting the man to realize he was a prickly grouch with a glare that could sap plants of the will to live. Granted, that was a helpful superpower when one was dealing with criminals. Ride-alongs as a kid had been fun, because no matter how big or cocky the criminal, they always cracked under Uncle Wilter's hard eyes. That gaze could make the most innocent angel invent a crime to confess. Those eyes burrowed into him now. For as much as the chief should be celebrating this next step in his career, he was as grumpy as ever. But Tolson had spent years building up an immunity to this glare, and attacked with countermeasures of his own, an innocent smile. "I just wanted to congratulate you, sir, both on your promotion and your escape from any antics Leo and I might get up to. Bet you're gonna miss filing reports on us." He leaned in and nudged his uncle. They were both big men, but his uncle's build was one of pure bulk, and nudging him was like trying to nudge a parked car. This actually earned a twitch at the corner of his uncle's mouth, which was the closest thing Tolson had seen to a smile from the man in, well, ever. Tolson would have to record the day in his planner, maybe establish it as a family holiday. Uncle Walter shook his head and rolled his eyes. Tolson was blown away that he was capable of both at the same time. "No," Walter said. "I'm not gonna miss either of you knuckleheads." "Okay, first of all, Uncle, name-calling is hurtful, and I know HR's talked to you about that before. Second of all, you're absolutely gonna miss us. When you're up there in your penthouse tower as Minister of whatever, you're gonna think back on us and miss the simpler times, when your biggest problem was unimpounding Leo's car, or calling Fire Station 14 to rescue me from that tree." "It's the Minister of Labor, Tolson." His uncle took another puff of his cigar. "Yes, my problems are about to get a whole lot bigger." "Convenient timing on the opening," Tolson blurted. He'd meant it in jest, but as soon as he said it, he realized it was in poor taste. Especially when Uncle Wilter laid into him again with the glare. Something in Tolson spurred him to boldness. Maybe it was his gut telling him that his uncle's response was unwarranted. Maybe it was just him finally having enough of his uncle's attitude. Now that he wasn't chief anymore, what could he really do to Tolson besides glare at him? "So," Tolson added, "you're not nervous about taking over a job for someone who just got killed this week? Not even a little?" "Incompetence gets people killed, Officer Gray. Do I strike you as incompetent? Picking up his whiskey, he removed the cigar and took a sip. Honest answer, like Mom would give? Walter choked on his whiskey, filling Tolson with elation. This man never cracked. Tolson had so many phone calls to make tonight. The people needed to know. His uncle growled. I should have fired you before stepping down. Again, hurtful, sir. Rolling his eyes, his uncle went back to sorting papers. Tolson leaned in to glance at them. What's all this? Old notes, not worth keeping around. His uncle scooted another stack of papers into the wastebasket, not even bothering to collate at first. The papers on the desk were mostly tucked into different folders scattered across the surface. Rather than get distracted by the gobs of lines of writing on the papers themselves, Tolson focused on the labels on the folders. For Ohana, Drivota, Varahina, Tigra. His uncle reached for a folder labeled Orana. He thumbed through the pages quickly, but Tolson still caught a glimpse of a pair of mugshots of someone who was clearly a Nolf. And that's when he started to recognize the layout of the pages he was seeing. These were rap sheets. This time, his uncle reached into his shirt pocket and produced a firearm lighter. He clicked it twice, and flame sprouted from its tip. Then he lit the corner of the Orana folder and dropped it into the wastebasket. Don't you think there's enough smoke in here already, Uncle? With a sigh, his uncle reached out and gathered the rest of the folders. I wanted to take a moment and reminisce, to enjoy closing this chapter of my life and moving on to new and better things. Thank you for ruining the moment. Then he dropped the remaining folders into the wastebasket too. Flames licked at the edges of pages that began to curl with an orange glow. Tolson took on a wry smile. I've spent most of my life perfecting the art of ruining moments for other people. Someone's got to do it. Might as well be me. His uncle rolled his eyes before downing the rest of his whiskey. Grabbing his coat off the back of his chair, he reached out to clamp a hand onto Tolson's shoulder. His claws dug in, not enough to draw blood, but still enough to notice. I'm so glad family reunions are the only time I'm ever going to have to see you again. It's like you're not listening, sir. Words are hurtful, Tolson repeated. Plus, you're ignoring another possibility. Uncle Walter took one last puff of his cigar before throwing it into the waste bin with everything else. The little fire inside was about the size of his head. I know acknowledging you at all is just asking for punishment, but I'm in a good mood, so enlighten me. Tolson offered his innocent smile again. If you ever get arrested, I'm going to be the first officer on your doorstep. His uncle snorted at this, then reached out to cup Tolson's cheek. Cute, Kit. Then he gave his cheek a few stiff pats. Goodbye, Officer Gray. Be sure to turn out the lights when you're done in here. With that, he threw his coat over his shoulder and left. A shiver ran through Tolson's body, and he rubbed his cheek on his sleeve. Then he grinned. He had finally stood up to his uncle. Granted, he'd waited until his uncle was a lame duck to do so. A soon-to-be rich lame duck. But this still felt like a victory for Tolson's personal growth. His gaze drifted to the open flames dancing in the wastebasket. That was absolutely a fire hazard. Also probably illegal. The station kept notes and files forever. Some of the ones in mothballs probably dated back to the station's founding. But if his uncle's final act as chief was to indulge in a bit of arson, who was he to... His thoughts trailed off as he caught a glimpse of a folder newly exposed by the spreading flames. This one read, Salatra. The witness who had run into the killer at the last two crimes had given that name. For the killer. Yanking the folder from the basket, Tolson sprinted for the nearest fire extinguisher. Chapter 18. Magic in the Air. Am I coming inside, or would you prefer for me to stay in the car? Sergei had rolled the window down, and even while leaning over the seat, his shoulder was nearly scraping the roof of the car. The world wasn't designed with Nolfs in mind, and that was a shame. No, it was closer to a crime. Moira shook her head. She told me where everything is. All the important stuff is supposed to fit in her bag. She patted the bag resting against her thigh. She tightened the shoulder strap as much as it would go, and the thing still hung low on her. Sergei was tall among Nolfs, Moira was short among Sneppards, and the world wasn't fair. At least the bag wasn't heavy. Yet. If you see any snops, honk or something. Sergei raised an eyebrow. Miss Moira, I grew up in District 11. The snops aren't worried about break-ins during the middle of the day. If anything, they'd be more likely to harass me for sitting behind the wheel of a vehicle they will assume I stole. Then I'll be fast, Moira said, and started up the sidewalk. Unlatching the waist-high gate, it squeaked like a dying animal as she opened it even a few inches. She glanced at the nearby houses, half expecting the horrible noise to draw neighbors outside, but she didn't even see motion at the windows. This wasn't a crime, yet she still felt more nervous than when tagging public property. The house before her was a small thing, though compared to her own home, every house was small. Red paint that was sun-bleached to a light shade of pink was peeling off the siding, and the windows were in desperate need of washing. By habit, Moira avoided the cracks in the sidewalk leading up to the house. It took extra attention with how many cracks there were. The meager steps up to the porch creaked under even her weight, and for a heart-gripping moment, she thought it would give way. When nothing further happened, her heart relaxed. Reaching into the bag at her thigh, she pulled out Naira's house keys. With a dozen keys on the keyring, and no common key between the three locks, it took nearly a minute of trial and error before she got inside. That was also with Naira explaining which keys she needed ahead of time. The wood flooring inside the house creaked too, though she couldn't feel it sag the same way the porch steps had. The first floor consisted of an entryway, living room, kitchen, dining room, and bathroom that all connected in something of a small circle. Upstairs looked to be some bedrooms, but she didn't need anything from up there. The first thing that struck her was how barren the house felt. People lived with so little? She scowled as soon as she had the thought. Yeah, Dipdross, not everyone has infinite money like your mom. Most of the bull probably lives like this. Show some respect for the poor. She rolled her eyes at the generalization. After all, the extremes in quality of living in Cyphus were definitely linked to a person's species, and that wasn't exactly something they could control. Her mother's willingness to employ Nolfs at a comparable rate to Sneppards was one of the few moral traits in her mother that she genuinely found inspiring. Still, it was boggling Moira's brain to see the economic effects of Cyphus's systemic racism firsthand. She'd known that poverty was prevalent, but seeing it like this was an uncomfortable truth. Walking around the meager wooden furniture in here, Moira was drawn to the pictures hung on the walls. In one, Naira was dressed in a graduate's gown, diploma tucked under one arm, while one boy clung to her leg and the other sat in her arms. Again, in Cyphus, it was something of a miracle to see a Nolf with a diploma. It just made Moira's respect for the woman increase. The next picture over was of Naira's husband, seated behind a cello and dressed in a tux almost as sharply pressed as Sergei could make his own suit. Naira stood behind him in a plain blue dress that she accentuated with the feathers dangling from her ears. The boys were dressed in button-up shirts with cute little ties, and they both looked like they couldn't wait to take them off. Beside that was a picture of the two boys in matching uniforms with white and black vertical stripes. They looked much happier out in a green park than they had in the concert hall. What must it be like to have a sibling, especially one so close in age? Gently laying a hand on the glass of the frame, she tried to imagine experiencing the camaraderie that led to genuine shared smiles like that. Her fingers left trails in the dust as she moved on. Passing through a kitchen that felt more like a barely furnished closet, Moira found the basement door tucked into a corner. These steps also creaked as she descended. Go figure. The air down here was damp, despite several days passing since her mother had flooded the place. It was still hard to believe her mother had been here at all, much less that she'd tried hard enough to escape that she broke things and hit people. But Moira had talked to both her mother and Naira. Between their two accounts, she was pretty confident that she had the full story of everything that had happened here. She found the broken water pipe in the unfinished bathroom. The handcuffs her mother had been so bitter about laid forgotten on the only bed down here. Moira snagged them, pocketing the key. There were more pictures in the bedroom down here, and everyone in the family looked older. Her eyes were drawn to another photo of the boys. One had managed to gain a notched ear between this photo and the baseball one upstairs, and his facial markings looked much like his mother's. The younger one had gained a lot of silvery fur in his face, clearly taking after his father. Something about the older one felt familiar, though she couldn't place it. It wouldn't have been through school. He was too old, and the private school Moira's mother sent her to was too rich-blooded for any Nolfs to attend. It was an easy way for the school to practice segregation while preaching inclusion. Yeah, they might allow anyone to attend, if they could afford it. Convenient that Nolfs were so widely kept from getting hired in any sort of high-paying field, instead having to settle for things like working in her mother's factory. The system was stupidly rigged, and no one seemed to care enough to change it. Moira growled to grant an outlet to her growing frustration, and brought her mind back to the present. She dawdled enough. Pulling a list from the bag, she headed back upstairs and started her hunt. That afternoon, Moira carefully set out the crystal molds, the small rack of finished crystals, the tray of small cylindrical metal capsules, and gloves and other tools she'd recovered from Naira's house. She organized them in groups on the concrete floor of her own basement, close enough for Naira to see through the bars, but far enough to keep her from grabbing anything. She trusted Naira far more than her mother did, but that didn't mean she was going to taunt an assassin with something she could weaponize. "Walk me through all of it," Moira said, unable to keep the excitement from her voice as she sat cross-legged on the floor. "I want to know what everything's for and how it works." Naira pulled her chair up to the bars, a smile teasing at her lips as she sat. She brushed back some stray hair, fingers bumping the feathers she still wore. Moira had to admit they were pretty on her, even if her mother would have considered them a poor person's accessory. So what? If they looked nice and people enjoyed wearing them, then who cared? Folding her hands in her lap, Naira began. "What do you know about alchemy, Miss Moira?" "That the stories try to make it out to be magic, but it's really science." Naira gave a soft laugh. "It's both, actually. Alchemy is simply a scientific and repeatable method of harnessing magic." Okay. It was hard not to be hesitant when an adult made a claim like that. Well, then why does stuff run on batteries? Cars, lights, my hoverboard. Almost everything in the bulb runs on one of the batteries produced by my mom's factories. "And you've never stopped to think about how those batteries power your car, or the lights, or your hoverboard?" "Science," Moira replied with a resolute nod. "I haven't learned how yet, but it has to be science." Naira raised an eyebrow, crossing her legs and cupping a knee as she leaned back in her chair. "So, if I told you it was magic?" Moira narrowed her eyes. That's what kids are told, but it's because adults don't like having to explain how the world works. The classic, "you'll learn in school when you're older," that everyone's parents tell them. I've seen some flashy presentations, but magic is a cop-out term. I want to know what's really going on. Smirking, Naira said, "I wish every student shared your healthy skepticism. Most come in so doe-eyed that they just accept what I present to them and forget to engage their brains as they learn." "You have to have a brain to engage it," Moira cut in. "I've met university students before, and they may be older, but I've yet to be impressed by one's ability to think." Naira's smirk widened to a grin. "Few actually go to the university to learn. Most simply want a piece of paper that supposedly obligates future employers to pay them better. Their apathy limits their own ability to learn." "Well, I'm here, and I'm ready to learn." Moira couldn't stop herself from squirming. The words were true, but admitting it felt gross. She liked learning, but school was an establishment meant to suck money out of parents who were too lazy to teach kids anything themselves. This felt weirdly like one of those private tutoring lessons that her mother tried to buy for her in the past. However, this was the first time the tutor was locked behind bars and couldn't run away screaming. Not that Moira was going to give her a reason to do so. Naira nodded, tapping her thumbs together over her knee. In that case, we need to start with the fundamentals. As I've said before, alchemy is equal parts math, science, and magic, the three best subjects of study. At its core, alchemy is the deliberate harnessing of magical energy through meticulous mathematical Please be careful with that. Moira froze, the orange crystal she'd picked up now motionless where she had previously been rolling it between finger and thumb. Why? Because if you crack that, you're going to have a fireball going off in your hands. Sorry, Moira muttered, slotting the crystal back into the small plastic rack she'd pulled it from. I fidget. You mentioned math and my mind went blank. Math is what makes alchemy a safe and repeatable science. Moira groaned without meaning to. She didn't want to discourage Naira from sharing, but her natural feelings towards math were too strong to fully suppress. Forcing interest back into her voice, she asked, "What does that have to do with batteries? Or these crystals?" "Do you know how the batteries are made?" Naira countered. "Sure," Moira shrugged. "People add in different ingredients at different stages of the assembly line. When you have all the stuff inside that powers the battery, you cap it off so that you can use it later." "That's a good start," Naira said. "Metal has the unique ability to absorb or reflect magical energy. And obviously, specific kinds of metals are better than others. I'm a fan of bismuth, but most batteries I've encountered are cased in tungsten, which is much cheaper to mass produce, and it makes a good container for containing the ingredients, as you called them. So I would use the term reactants." "What's the difference?" Naira swapped legs. "It's a subtle difference. Fundamentally, magical energy is released through chemical reactions. So while you combine them, much like ingredients while following a recipe, it's more accurate to think of them as reactants. Once you put them together, they will react until they reach their equilibrium and effectively stop. Now, the reaction doesn't actually stop, but the reaction balances to the point where, Miss Moira, if you break that, you'll have a much harder time extracting crystals from the molds. It's a delicate tool to begin with." Moira hesitated, then stopped playing with the small wire tool she'd picked up when she'd zoned out. It was hard not to zone out when someone started speaking what sounded like another language. "Can you maybe put that in terms that someone who hasn't gone to university will understand?" Naira took a moment to choose new words. "The world is happiest, if you will, in a state of equilibrium. It's the state of lowest energy. You are familiar with the concept of energy, yes?" When Moira nodded, Naira continued. "Everything in this world has traces of magical energy in it. What alchemy does is gather up a bunch of those little bits of energy, stuffs them all together, and then releases them all at once. On a storm day, a single drop of rain isn't very noticeable, right? It just gets you a little wet, gets soaked up immediately by your fur, and doesn't do anything more. It's harmless. But what happens when all those little droplets of rain collect in the same area? Are you old enough to remember what happened 8 years ago with the Mylon building in District 6? Moira frowned. "Didn't it flood or something?" Giving an approving nod, Naira said, "Exactly. Some genius architect thought it was a good idea to invert the top. Since most buildings have roofs that slope from the center to the outside, rain runs right off. The New Age designer they called in for the Mylon building wanted to be special, so their design sloped from the outside to the center. Now, they did have the forethought to realize that water was going to collect in there, but a small child could have told them that. Having had this great revelation, they installed a drain in the center that was supposed to direct the water out the sides of the building down these pre-installed channels. Admittedly, the end result would have been lovely during storm days, having waterfalls built into your building, but that's not what happened." "So what did happen?" Moira prompted. Shaking her head with a mirthless chuckle, Naira said, "They funneled all the water into a drain that eventually plugged. When nobody bothered to check it, it backed up. Eventually, it filled so full, the upper floors collapsed under the weight, and thousands of gallons of water burst through the building to flood the streets below. A couple dozen people died, many more were injured, and the property damage was estimated in the millions of Christum. The whole thing was a disaster. My point is, rain is harmless by itself, but the moment you collect it in large quantities... Naira pointed at the small rack of colorful crystals. Think of those as the plugged funnel holding back the flood. If you break it, all that collected magic's going to rush out, and it's not going to care what's in its way. I've witnessed someone lose their hand before to an unchecked alchemical reaction. Moira eyed the crystals with newfound nervousness. If it's dangerous to collect magic like that, then why do we do it? Because it's useful, Naira said with a shrug of nonchalance. Almost every part of your daily living is the result of one or more controlled and mathematically prepared alchemical reactions. Are you familiar with the types of batteries your mother's factories produce? Thinking for a moment, Moira responded. We hold the patent for e-batteries, so those are the primary one Mom's focused on. But like other factories around Cyphus, we also produce the older style F and A style batteries. Naira counted on her fingers as she listened, noting Electrum, Pyrum, and Aurum, probably. Maybe Aquam, but I think Aurum's more common. Those are the ones I teach my students to produce anyways. Moira knew the terms from stuff that used them. Pyrum engines and lights, Electrum and Aurum repulsors, but she'd just known them by name. She'd never thought to question why things were called what they were called, for now anyway. So she prompted, and those are... Magic, Naira said with a grin and a wink. Great, that's both helpful and informative, thank you. Naira raised an eyebrow, evidently amused by her response. Why did adults have to get their kicks from being cryptic? Naira said nothing more. Suddenly afraid her sarcasm had prematurely ended the lesson, Moira apologized. Sorry. The word was more drawn out than it probably should have been, so she made herself follow up with, What do they have to do with magic? I'm glad you asked. Yeah, I know you are, Moira muttered. Naira tilted her head a bit to the side. What was that? Me too, Moira said, more loudly, forcing a smile she hoped looked innocent. It must have worked, because Naira continued. Adults were so gullible. There's 7 primary alchemical reactions. In order of their discovery, we have Pyrum, Aquam, Aurum, Terrum, Curum, Necrum, and Electrum. Moira recognized some, but not all of the words Naira used. They weren't snep words. She couldn't help but comment, That's a really pretty language. I like how much it rhymes when I ask Sergei to speak it. Lips twisting in an appreciative smile, Naira said, It's part of our heritage. I like a lot of the word endings in Null, too. She paused for a moment, thoughts obviously drifting before she continued the lesson. So, you have 7 primary reactions, and each of these reactions produces a different kind of magical energy. And she frowned. Sorry, that's a bit misleading. It doesn't create the magical energy, it just releases the energy that you've gathered. Moira imagined filling a crystal with magic, like filling a balloon with water, and then popping it to send water everywhere. But how is that magic? It sounds like science. Everything's got a fancy proper name, like science. Stretching her fingers until her knuckles cracked, Naira smiled. That's just it. It's both. You're not creating the magic. You're harnessing it through intelligent application of scientific methods and principles. And math? Lots of math. Moira stared down at the collection of tools and crystals before her. So, math and science let you collect energy, but what do you do with it? Your earlier analogy of a flood makes sense, but wasn't that a bad thing? I mean, you even said it yourself. That orange one could blow up in my face. Is that dangerous? Naira's grin widened, her ears twitching. Very dangerous. But that's part of the thrill. Redirect the flood of energy. Like the flood dissipated through side streets, you have to give the energy an optimal path. If you were able to block specific streets off completely, then you could direct the flood exactly where you wanted it to go, right? Same thing here. Twirling her fingers around each other, Moira asked, And you direct it by magic. Moira's shoulders slumped. Adults and their cryptic circles. Worse, her frustration seemed to only add to the twinkle in Naira's eyes. Gonna elaborate? Moira asked. You can spend all day studying theory to learn something, but I'm a firm believer that experience is the best teacher. Moira raised an eyebrow. Meaning? She was having a hard time suppressing her excitement at the implication. It was a delicate balance of showing enough interest to keep Naira talking, while also showing enough indifference to not weird her out or scare her off. Moira definitely wanted this to be an offer to learn alchemy, but she was also trying to manage her own expectations. Mothers were good at shooting down fun and exciting things, but alchemy would be so cool to learn. So she sat with hands behind her back to hide her fidgeting. Say it, she thought. Just rip the bandage and either say it or shoot me down. Naira gave a small smile, seeming to realize the effect her dramatic pause was having. Thankfully, she finally relieved Moira's suspense as she said, Don't tell your mother, but we're gonna have to get you high. The sun was long set by the time Moira snuck back into the basement holding area. Naira's bag was much lighter now, since Moira had taken the molds and the tools out and hidden them in her room. All she had now were a few crystals and a couple of those odd small metal canisters. Naira had told her to only bring specific colors of crystals: brown, clear, or light blue. The low-light firearm fixture set into the wall cast an orange glow to a russet form laying in the bed of the cell. Despite tiptoeing so quietly Moira couldn't hear herself, Naira still spoke up from the bed. You made sure no one's going to find us? Moira narrowed her eyes. The Nulf woman wasn't even looking her way. How had she known Moira was here? Dismissing the question with a shake of her head, Moira stepped up to the bars. Mom's asleep, Sergei's reading. Most of the guards are out patrolling the grounds, and the two that should be watching the basement stairwell are grabbing drinks from the kitchen. Good, Naira purred. She rolled over in bed, and the ambient firearm light in the room found new reflective surfaces in her eyes and teeth. Yeah, that wasn't creepy at all. Moira suddenly felt like she'd been invited into some kind of cult activity. Her nerves whispered that her mother would come bursting through the door any minute. What did you bring? Naira asked, stepping forward to grip the bars. Lifting the bag's main flap, Moira looked inside. 3 each of the brown, clear, and blue crystals, and then 2 of the canisters that are supposed to make me high. Naira snorted. I already told you I was joking. Prism is literally just compressed air from outside the bulb. Though it enhances your senses, it's not actually a drug. Moira rolled her eyes. And I already said that it feels much more rebellious and cool to think of it as a drug. If my mother asks, I'm going to tell her to her face that I'm doing drugs because she's neglecting me. The older woman on the other side of the bars stared at her with a raised eyebrow before stifling a laugh with her hand. I'm not joking, Moira insisted. Naira grinned. I know. With a frown, Moira smacked the bars with the back of her hand. As an adult, you're supposed to tell me that that's bad and disrespectful and cruel to my mother. Naira chuckled. That may be, but I'm inclined to think your mother deserves it. Falling silent, Moira glanced back towards the stairs out of the basement. No mother hiding in the shadows to take offense or stop her. It had been a foolish hope. She turned back to lock eyes with Naira. Why did you let my mother live? Naira met her gaze for a few long moments, then her shoulders slumped in a sigh. I'm not really sure. It was just a gut thing. And when my gut talks, I listen. Even if it endangers your family? Naira flinched. Your mother was different. Something told me that I could use her to find them. If it's any consolation, I'm pretty sure she is actually looking for them. Naira sniffed, continuing to stare into the distance. It's not. Moira began, then trailed off. Yeah, that's fair. Her next words were genuine, even as embarrassment tried to bar the gates of her mouth. Thank you for not taking my mother from me. I hope it doesn't get your family taken from you. Naira let out a mirthless chuckle. Bit late for that. With a scowl of frustration, Moira added, well, Mom can't keep you down here forever. She'd already tried to talk her mom into letting Naira go, but she'd been dismissed, as per usual. Her scowl faded as she forced herself to stop thinking about her mother. But that doesn't change the fact that she's got you here now, so let's make the most of it, shall we? At that, she held up Naira's bag. Naira's lips and nose twitched as her face went through a series of emotions Moira couldn't track. With a soft nod, Naira brought her eyes back to Moira. So, how do I... magic? Moira asked. Naira smirked. It's easy, but it takes a bit of setup and practice. Start by taking out one of those metal canisters. Reaching down into the bag, Moira plucked one from the bottom, holding it up to examine it. The thing had an almost silvery sheen to it, was as long as her middle finger, and nearly as thick around. The last bit of it narrowed to a tip, like a claw protruding from the finger. Naira held out her hand through the bars. I'll open it for you. Moira started to give it to her, then stopped. Withdrawing her hand, she said, I can do it. Tell me how. Bringing her hand back to grip one of the bars, Naira adopted the annoyed parent look Moira knew so well. It wasn't going to get her anywhere. If anything, it inspired Moira to double down. I'll be careful, but you said yourself that experience is the best teacher, right? Naira's shoulders slumped in an extended sigh. So I did. Fine. Bite off the little tip at the end. Just remember, there's compressed air inside, so it's going to try to escape the moment it's released. Prism only helps when it's in your system, so you need to breathe as much of it in as you can. Just don't panic. Your body might freak out. Do you have any history with hyperventilation or anything? Moira stared down at the object in her hands. Not to my knowledge. Then put it to your teeth. Breathe out most, but not all of the air in your lungs. And when you're ready, bite down and inhale. That sounded stupidly easy, and Moira was suddenly even more offended that Naira had offered to do it for her. How young did Naira think she was? The metal was cold as Moira positioned the tip near the front of her teeth. Her tongue brushed against the foreign object and immediately recoiled. It tasted a bit like slightly tangy, well, metal. Should it taste weird? Forks didn't taste weird, unless you were hungry. Was she hungry? Breathe out, bite down, inhale, Naira repeated. Yeah, that was easy. So why was she so nervous? If someone at school had dared her to do this, she would have done it without hesitation. Was this any different? No. She bit down into the prism canister. Feeling the metal crimp spurred her on to bite even harder. Easy, Tiger, Naira said. You just need to puncture it enough to let the air escape. You don't need to tear off the whole tip. Rolling her eyes, Moira pulled the canister out and said, Everyone knows tigers are from the Gentis bulb. Do I look like a muscle-headed barbarian to you? Naira's eyes widened. Don't waste it. You're supposed to be breathing it. Then Moira heard it. A high-pitched hiss as air escaped through the large hole she'd punched into the tip. With a start, Moira stuck it back into her mouth and breathed as deeply as she could. The sensation was immediate, overwhelming, and left her lightheaded. Her world exploded with color and sound, and her vision blurred as she forgot to breathe. Her lungs felt coated in something warm and heavier than air, though not as thick as the fractal had been. Gasping for breath, it came easier than she expected, but she still staggered forward against the bars. Whoa, she heard Naira say, the tone dancing through her brain like the word had been sung. A moment later, she felt hands gripping her and helping her sink to her knees. More words danced in her ears. Easy, easy, you're going to be all right. Naira's accent was lovely, every syllable coming to life as if sung in succession by voices in a choir. Leaning forward, Moira rested her head against the metal bars and tried to focus on breathing. The glow of the room was brighter than before, and despite the orange tint it caused, she could start to make out individual colors a little clearer. The reds of Naira's feathers dangling just within her vision, the whites and grays of the fur on her own arms, Everything stood out more distinctly. More than that, the fireroom lights in the ceiling were humming. Not just the constant, single-tone hum she knew from electrum lighting. No, this was active and flowing. It told a story without words, conveyed emotion without body language. She'd never heard fireroom lights make noise before. "Why do I hear light?" she gasped. "What?" Naira asked, voice still gracing her like an angel dancing through the air. "It should be brighter, but maybe you're having auditory hallucinations. Believe it or not, this is natural for your body, but since it's not used to it, it's going to need time to adjust. During that time, things are probably going to be a little weird." Weird? Moira thought. She just spent the last 30 seconds hanging on every word this woman said, because each syllable tied into the next one, more harmoniously than the last. Each sentence composed a song she'd never heard before, but the more she heard, the more she wanted to hear. Her head pounded, and her ears flattened despite themselves. Naira must have noticed because she lowered her voice. "Slow your breathing if you can. If your breaths are too deep or too frequent, you'll burn through your prism faster, and if you breathe too shallowly, you'll pass out. So work towards a happy medium. In through your mouth, out through your nose." The longer she listened, the more Moira began to hear patterns in Naira's speech. There were sounds that would repeat, sounds that liked to blend together, and sounds that seemed to jump to the forefront of the song, but never actually drowned out the rest. Forcing herself to focus on content rather than presentation, Moira listened to the advice she was getting. A minute later, and her breathing had started to calm. The overly bright colors still popped in contrast with each other, having settled into something much less painful on her eyes. But her hearing had come alive. At first, it had been too much for her mind to process all the additional sound she was picking up. As she calmed down, she started to hear individual things amidst the wall of noise. She couldn't make out words, but she could hear muffled conversation from nearby guards, though she knew no one should be by the door. Naira's voice carried a song when she spoke, and it simplified, but never quite vanished when she stopped speaking. In fact, even her breathing seemed to carry core elements of this song that exploded with rich detail and fullness whenever she formed words. Moira's own breathing carried a unique rhythm, each breath ending with a specific four-piece cadence. While Naira's song focused on percussive elements that liked to crescendo unexpectedly, Moira's song seemed to find melodic refrains to repeat in a satisfying pattern that further calmed her. But the fireroom. She glanced up at the light fixture, seeing the signature flicker everyone associated with fireroom. Only now she saw it in a whole new light. Before, she'd assumed the flickering to be random. And in a sense, it was. But she could hear it now. The fireroom itself giggling with the enthusiasm of children on a playground. As the light raced around in its enclosure, she could hear individual voices crashing together and skipping over one another. And as any individual voice grew tired and quieted, the light flickered. Yet, new fresh voices would come in to take its place. Never quite identical, but so very, very close to each other. "Are you okay, Miss Moira?" Moira tore her gaze away from the light to look at the woman addressing her. Her eyes drank in much more detail of Naira's face now, more easily discerning different strands of fur amidst the whole. The charcoal markings really did work well with her russet fur. Moira couldn't contain the question that came to mind. "Is this why so many people do fractal?" Naira let out a laugh that sang with the beauty of a choir of angels. Moira didn't miss that the firearm overhead blazed for a moment in response. "No, child. Fractals are much more concentrated, and they often include additives to enhance the experience. It may start the same as Prism, but it's far worse when people finish making it. It's intentionally designed to be addicting." "Your voice is beautiful," Moira said, getting distracted by the melodies present in her own voice. "Will you teach all my classes so that I can just listen to you all day?" Pushing off from her, Naira tilted her head with a guilty smile. "Maybe I shouldn't have started you with a full dose." Reaching forward, she lifted one of Moira's eyelids with her thumb. The glow's about where I expected it to be, but it is only your second time, so I'm not surprised you're a little loopy. That was just it. She wasn't loopy. Overwhelmed from sensory overload? Sure. But loopy? No. Moira hadn't experienced such clarity of thought since waking up that morning. She felt alert, confident, even as the world around her left her awestruck. Her hand reached into the bag for the second canister of prism. If one canister did this, what new experiences might two open up for her? Naira must have figured out what she was doing, because a hand clamped firmly down onto Moira's wrist. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's take it easy, and just get used to the effects of one for now. Okay, Miss Moira? Mildly disappointed, Moira let her remove the prism canister from her fingers. More voices called to her from the bag. Not with words, but with sounds and music. She glanced down, half expecting to see fairies in Naira's bag. Instead, all she saw were the sets of colored crystals she'd brought along. Reaching in again, she pulled out a tan one, holding it close to her ear. The melody trapped inside was energetic, like the firearm overhead, but not nearly so forceful. If anything, this one sounded somehow even more playful. I can hear it, she whispered. Which one did you grab? Naira asked, reaching out to uncurl Moira's fingers. A moment later, the Nulf gave out a startled gasp and confiscated the crystal. I definitely don't want to hold an Aurum crystal that close to your ear, dear. If you crack it, even accidentally, it's large enough you might permanently lose hearing in that ear. By this point, Moira's focus had returned, and she was growing more confident in picking out all the many individual sounds she was hearing. She scowled. Why was it that adults couldn't trust her with things? If she needed to be careful, all they had to do was warn her, and she'd be careful. Instead, they just panicked and took things without explaining. It's a frustrating habit, and one she was beginning to suspect was universal to mothers. Embracing her scowl, she looked back down at the bag. Well, which one is safe for me to listen to, then? Naira considered for a moment. Terum, one of the dark brown ones. Her voice was so pretty now, Moira almost forgot to stay mad at her. Reaching into the bag, Moira selected the smallest dark brown crystal. It was about the size of her thumb. She held it up for Naira to see. Is this one safe to hold up to my ear, or is it going to explode on me too? Naira chuckled. Yes, that one's safe. Terum has the lowest energy release of all the alchemical reactions. It's quite pleasant and soothing. Moira held this one up to her ear, then almost had to stick it into her ear to hear it. The tones were faint, but they were there. Deep and percussive, like workers chanting in unison to keep up each other's spirits. The tones were muffled by the crystal itself. Holding back the flood, Moira mused. May I crack this one so I can hear it better? Naira was watching her closely now, an amused expression on her face. If you like. It is safe to do so with that one. Gripping the crystal in both hands, Moira twisted until she heard a crack. The song tripled in volume immediately. It was still quieter overall than anything else in the room, but the Terum crystal sang like a contented farmer, humming to himself in his field. There was a confident nonchalance to it, a joyful quality that was subtle, not overbearing or in a hurry like Firearm or Aurum had been. This was a simple pleasure that came from being alive. No wonder it was supposed to be calming for others. She listened to it, trying to hum along. The crystal in her hand seemed to glow in response to it, and Naira's eyes widened. Eventually, the song ended, and the last notes faded away. The crystal was spent. She stared at the dull thing numbly, shaking it to see if there was anything left. There wasn't. Naira laughed as Moira reached for another crystal. What? Moira asked, clutching a fresh Terum crystal to her chest defensively. What's so funny? The mischievous twinkle returned to Naira's eyes. For all your mother's worries about you trying drugs, I seem to have introduced you to something far worse. Worse? Moira thought. How could something so beautiful possibly be bad? She cracked the next crystal, closing her eyes as she raised it to her ears and embraced this one's song. It had all the same core elements as the last one, but with a slightly different tempo and unique refrain. She hummed to try to match it. Yes, Naira mused. I think I've created a different kind of addict. Chapter 19. Role Models. Moira's days blurred together after that. Each morning, Naira gave her a new ingredient to find and procure. Then she would instruct her how to prep it by reading ratios from her alchemy table and walking her through the required math. It was like cooking, but worse, because once you prepped a crystal, you had to let it set for anywhere from 10 to 20 hours, depending on the crystal type. You could reduce that time by sticking the crystal mold in the freezer, but that only saved a couple of hours. The early ones in the week weren't bad. Garden soil for making tarum crystals, cleaning alcohol for making curum crystals, water collected on a storm day for making aquam crystals. Moira hadn't realized that the bulb pulled from an outside water source for storm days, but it explained why the bulb's water supply never ran out. But today's ingredient for Aurum was gross. What sicko had been the first person to see something's intestines and think, "Ah, yes, I bet that blowing air into this and filling it up like some psychopath's balloon will do something cool." The Dullahan's cook on staff had helped her thoroughly clean the entrails, but nothing had prepared her for putting it to her lips. She shuddered again, remembering the scent, the texture, the taste. Ugh. Every evening, Moira snuck down to visit Naira, bringing with her more crystals and prism. And slowly, Naira began teaching her how to reach out to the reactions and connect with them. The problem was that over the course of a week, Moira had used up most of Naira's supply. The only crystals she was currently being taught to make were tarum, curum, aquam, and aurum. They were less potent reactions, especially at the ratios Naira was giving her, so they were safer for practice. But just as Moira was starting to get a feel for actually connecting with the magic of these reactions, they'd run out of prism, so she hadn't been able to practice any of the fun part of alchemy last night, or the night before. Worse, getting Naira to admit where she got prism from was an experience worse than trimming a kit's claws. Her vendor actually lived outside the bulb on the outskirts of Cyphus. Apparently, Naira knew a way to sneak out with the day laborers, but a short, sneppered girl would stand out among that many nulfs. Moira couldn't exactly ask her mother for a permit to go outside the bulb either. If she didn't forbid it outright, her mom would want to know why her daughter wanted to go out into the toxic jungle wasteland outside the bulb. She could remember her mother saying, "We send nulfs out there to gather for ciphers so that sneppards don't have to. Besides, many of them like it out there, and it would be wrong to rob them of the opportunity to stretch their legs a bit." So, yeah, that probably wasn't going to fly. But Moira needed to hear those wonderful songs again. Sure, making crystals was important to learn, and you could still break them to release energy, but it wasn't the same as connecting with that energy. To actually listen to it and get swept away by each new note, and then contribute to the energetic choir and build upon their song. She missed experiencing the magic. So, if her mother's resources couldn't get her prism, she would have to improvise. That had been the thought process that led her back to this particular alley in District 5. Slowing her momentum, she hopped off her Aurum hoverboard and strolled past the large fluorescent green arrow. It was early afternoon, so it wasn't surprising to see no one occupying these back alleys. Hugging her board to her side, she tried the door she'd been through before. It wasn't locked, but it creaked enough to make her flinch. With a sigh, she paused her cassette tape and lowered her headphones. She'd want to be able to hear down here. Seeing all the infrastructure surrounding her as she walked was still disconcerting. Looking down through the gaps in the catwalks felt like it would herald the onset of vertigo. It was eerily quiet down here. Something skittered around far below her, but other than that, she only heard her own footsteps and breathing. She paused outside the final door, staring up at the large green arrow painted above it. The bag on her shoulder felt heavier now, Christum inside clinking together as she readjusted the strap. She wasn't used to carrying physical currency like this, but she was unconvinced a bunch of Nulfin rebels had any use for a check. Only as her hand rested on the door handle did it sink in. She was a rich kid, alone, underground, with a substantial amount of money, hoping to buy drugs. Her knees nearly buckled, but she gripped the door handle harder. She could do this. She just needed to channel her mother's ability to exude power and command in any situation. With a scowl, she threw the door open. It was better maintained than the main door, and it slammed open, dragging her into the room with its momentum. A small group of Nolfs were gathered off to the side, their ears perking at the noise. As one, they turned to look, and Moira felt 5 pairs of eyes settle on her. 2 Nolfs were stretched out atop a ratty couch with more holes and stains than actual upholstery. A small table beside it was ringed by simple wooden chairs, each one supporting another Nolf. A number of cards and small bits of crystum decorated the top of the table, scattered between open glass bottles of liquid. "Something we can do for you, Kit?" one of the card players asked, his gaze moving from her face to her hoverboard to her suspiciously bulging bag. The couple on the couch settled back into reclined positions, running their fingers through each other's hair and sharing a lit necrol stick. Moira recognized them as the ones who had guarded the door the first time she'd been here. Even laying down, the woman's green-tipped dark mohawk fanned out impressively. Not Moira's personal choice, but she had to admit, it looked good on this Nolf. Another one of the card players rubbed at his eyes, then actually stood up. "Oh, hey! Welcome back!" The first one who had spoken shot this one a look, asking with a snort, "You know this kid, Siev?" Siev gave a quick nod, though Moira was acutely aware that his eyes wouldn't leave her face. "Yeah, she came to the last recruitment night." The guy on the couch chimed in. "I remember her. She's got the sick hoverboard. Welcome back, short stuff." He said the last part with a wave and a chuckle, and the woman who curled into him reached up to flick his nose. Moira returned the wave awkwardly. She still didn't feel comfortable being in a room with people that dwarfed her, but every one of them had that "don't mess with me or I'll mess you up" look that she envied. Her school didn't have cool kits like these, though most everyone here was probably at least several years older than her. Siev beckoned with a hand. "Come on in, we don't bite." "Unless someone deserves it," the third card player chimed in. "True," Siev admitted. Gathering his cards into one hand, he tapped them against his leg. He still hadn't removed his eyes from her face, but she recognized him now. He'd been the one she had talked to just before passing out. Yeah, she had a few questions for him while she was here. But she needed to be confident. Her posture felt upright, though it was easy to second guess with so many people watching her. Adjusting her bag on her shoulder only served to remind her of just how much money she was carrying. How had she thought this was a good idea? "Can I get you something?" Siev asked. The 2 card players on either side of him shared a look, mouthing something to each other before breaking into grins. It took every ounce of self-control Moira had not to just blurt out fractal. She had to remind herself that doing drugs was only cool until you blabbed about them, or showed weakness by demonstrating a need for them. If she just told these people what she wanted, they'd probably kick her back out the door for not being cool. Or they'd rob her, then kick her out. So she gave a curt nod. She needed to play the long game. "Yeah, what do you have?" Siev smiled, setting his cards face down on the table. "I'll do this hand without me." From the look of things, they already were. He gestured with his head towards a nearby door that had been shut during the big meetup. "Drinks are back here." Moira followed him back to a small kitchen that only barely qualified as such. The sink in here looked industrial, the oven door was rusting, and an untreated table was the only counter space in the room. Siev walked up to a refrigerator that had peeling green paint, and when he opened it, the scent that hit Moira's nose was like sour milk. Crouching beside it, he glanced at the surplus of individual bottles inside. "What kind of flavors do you like? Want something fruity? Something with kick? Something plain?" "Kick," Moira said without hesitation. Her actual answer was fruity, but she wasn't about to admit weakness. Siev grinned. "Suit yourself." Scooting several bottles aside, He selected one with a dark label and a name Moira had never heard before. Pulling it out, he offered it to her. Just as she reached for it, he pulled it back, holding up a finger. The drinks around here are for friends, and friends here exist on a first-name basis. My name's Aloka, or Siev. Either is fine, so call me whatever you want. How about you? The first name he gave sounded distinctly Nolfin. Part of her wanted to give a fake name as a safety thing, but the more she thought about it, the more unnecessary it felt. Her mother was the famous one, and as long as she left off her last name, she should be fine. But it was cool that he had two names, and she didn't want to be shown up. My birth name is Moira, but I've been given the name Karana before. It was only after saying it that she realized claiming a Nolfin name might be rude, but Siev didn't seem to mind. If anything, he looked intrigued. I got a preference? Moira shrugged, then remembered she needed to be commanding. Call me Moira. He nodded, handing her the bottle. Moira. It's a very pretty name. Thank you, she flushed and tried to unscrew the bottle's cap. It didn't budge. Need help with that? His question drew her attention back to his face. He had an easygoing grin that made her scowl. What, he didn't think she could do it? She tried twisting harder, and still nothing. It doesn't twist off, he noted. Oh. With a sigh, she handed it back to him. Taking the bottle, he propped the cap against the lip of the table. In one smooth motion, he drove the palm of his hand down, striking the cap and popping it free. The simplicity of it all only upset Moira more. She could have done that. Probably. Handing the now open bottle to her, Siev turned to lean against the table. Glad to see you looking so good. You were pretty loopy last time I saw you. Moira narrowed her eyes, bringing the bottle to rest against her chest. What exactly happened last time? Siev smirked. You collapsed into my arms. So I did the heroic thing and carried you outside. Then a scary dude in a suit came up and demanded I hand you over. I was gonna fight for your honor until he said that he was your driver and had photo evidence of the two of you. So I left you with him. Well, he kinda just took you from me. But if it had been some creepazoid or whatever, I would have beaten him up in a heartbeat. This guy was tall, but not Sergei levels of tall. Considering that Sergei was easily 2 to 3 times his mass, it was hard to picture a fight going any way other than Sergei's favor, but it would probably bruise this guy's ego to point that out. So instead, she brought her free hand down to rest on her hip and continued. That's all that happened? Siev's grin remained plastered to his face, and he lifted 2 fingers in pledge. I mean, I did almost trip up the stairs because I was admiring your eyeshadow, but yeah, that's pretty much it. Moira blinked. You like it? Yeah, purple's a good color for you. Goes well with your natural whites and grays. Nobody at school ever complimented her appearance. Nobody at home ever did anything but scoff at Moira's attempt to dive into modern experimental fashion. Except Sergei, but he was basically paid to look after her 27, so he probably saw complimenting her as part of his job. You gonna try your drink or just hold it? His question pulled Moira out of her distracted thoughts, and she glanced down at the open bottle in her hands. Then she frowned. Of course. Without even bothering to sniff the contents, she brought it to her mouth and took a gulp. To her great disappointment, she discovered that what he had given her was not actually alcohol. It was just soda, with a bitter aftertaste that almost had a burning sensation. She scowled at the bottle. When you offered something with kick, I thought it'd be like a beer or something. The table squeaked as Siev laughed. No, Zalota doesn't let us keep any alcohol around. It's important to keep a clear head at all times around here. That was her opening, though how to word it? None of your eyes are glowing right now. That also to keep a clear head? Siev's grin only widened. Honestly, it's clearer on Fractal, but only once you're used to it. It's potent stuff, especially if you just let it sit in your system without using it. Time to test the waters. That's actually why I'm here. Siev raised an eyebrow. Looking for a second dose? With a gulp she hoped he didn't see, Moira nodded. He chuckled. Out of luck there, I'm afraid. Moira's heart sank. You guys are out of fractal? To her surprise, he didn't seem fazed by her question. Did she really look that much like a kid that he wasn't suspicious of her at all? What if she was an undercover snop or something? Siev shrugged. Used most of our supply on the crowd. What's left is being set aside for a job. Zelota's got a personal stash, but stealing any of that is a good way to lose a hand. Oh. Moira tried to hide her disappointment with another swig of her soda. At that moment, a new figure entered the room. Another Nulf wearing a hooded jacket with a signature green and white they seemed to like in this group. Siev waved at the newcomer. Sup, boss? Ears burning? Moira spotted a distinct notch in the Nulf's ears, which twitched as he gripped the refrigerator handle. His charcoal muzzle was easier to make out in profile, so she wasn't just staring up at his chin. Seriously, how was it fair that everyone anywhere close to her age was so much taller than she was? Zelota gave Siev a flat look. My ears weren't burning. Should they be? Only if you're playing with Fyram again. Zelota rolled his eyes and started rummaging through the fridge. You'll get the mixtures right eventually, Taz, Siev continued. Zelota grunted, but otherwise seemed to ignore the playful jab. His own voice was a gravelly desert where humor must go to die as he asked, Who's the broad? Oh, one of the recruits from the other night actually came back. Guess we made a good impression. Selecting a bottle from the back, Zelota popped the cap with a knife stashed somewhere in his jacket, and downed a third of the bottle in one go. Then he glanced at Moira and growled. Not in the business of handouts, kid. Especially not for snaps. Moira did her best to make her entire 5 feet and change of height look meaningful, leaving her hand firmly planted on her hip and leaning into a more confident pose. I'm sorry. I thought you guys were supposed to be the inclusive ones. We're not the ones that have problems being inclusive, Kit. Rolling his eyes, Zelota took another drink. My name is Moira. Zelota swallowed. Didn't ask. I saw what you did on stage, Moira said. You want people to think you're some great fire wizard and that Fractal gives you superpowers. You want people to think you're a hero that can go make a difference by killing people, as if violence is going to solve Cyphus's problems. The remnants of Zelota's drink sloshed in the bottle as he snorted. If talking gets you killed anyway, then I'd rather get killed by doing something. Don't expect you to understand, girlie. So a handful of Fyram crystals and cheap bravado's gonna make the world a better place? Zelota rolled his eyes again before glancing over at Siev. She's cute, but kick her out when you're done playing around. Well, this wasn't working. If he was going to be an arrogant, self-righteous prick, then maybe she could pull on that. Your speech was moving, Alchemancer. She paused at the word, noting with satisfaction that it won her a smirk of approval. You really opened my eyes. The fractal opened my eyes to a beautiful world I want to touch again. I want to get lost in its music again. The toned Nulf looked down his charcoal-colored snout at her for a few moments. Then he snorted and drained the rest of his bottle. It's just another junkie waiting to happen, Siev. The considerate thing to do is just kick her out. There's nothing for you here, Kit. Go take your expensive toys and find something fun and productive to do with your life. He moved to leave, but Moira stepped into his path. Kit, you're really starting to... He trailed off, then narrowed his gaze at her. His nose twitched as he sniffed at the air, and then leaned in to sniff at her. What did you call me earlier? Moira gulped, but before she could respond, Siev spoke up from where he still leaned against the table. Alchemancer is what I called you during the recruitment event. And you knew I was using Fyram. Zelota's eyes searched hers, and frightened as she was, she forced herself to hold his gaze. Finally, he smirked. Be honest, Kit. Why are you here? Well, I think you're right about the political climate, and that we need to stand up for change around here, and... Cut the dross. You're here for Fractal, right? With a gulp, Moira nodded. Then her hand came down to rest on her bag. I'm willing to buy it. Zalota rolled his eyes. We're not drug dealers, Kit. Could have fooled me, Moira shot back. Seems like holding your audience on the products. Could have fooled me, Moira shot back. Seems like hooking your audience on the product's bound to drive up sales, and he cut her off. I wasn't done talking. Moira clamped her jaw shut again. Zalota put a finger under her chin, looking her over and continuing to sniff at her. This guy was definitely a nutcase. Finally, he let her chin drop and stood up with a sigh. Introduce her to the others. She wants Fractal, and she's going to have to help out. How soon? Siev asked. I know we were planning on tomorrow, but... Yeah, we're still going through with tomorrow. If Pipsqueak here is serious, then tomorrow would be a great chance to prove herself. If she wants a cut, she better prove she can pull her weight. As light as that might be. He gave her a disdainful look to size her up. So she did the natural thing and stuck out her tongue. Zalota snorted in response, and Moira realized too late that maybe childish behavior wouldn't help her case. But if it took doing something for this group to get what she needed to experience magic again, then she was happy to do so. It seemed cool. She could be cool. And they already underestimated her, so all she had to do was prove them wrong. Nothing could be easier. Leo gasped in pain as he pulled on his boot. Tolson had brought him a change of clothes, something he desperately needed today. He wasn't about to visit his mother in a hospital gown. He had enough to worry about. It had been just over a week since Leo had been admitted to the hospital. His neck finally had full range of motion again, and he'd been walking whenever he could find an excuse. He didn't want bed sores, but his body was finicky and prone to complain anyway. If his left foot was fine and happy again, then why was his right foot being dumb? They'd checked it this morning when they redid the bandages on his toes, and it was better, but not quite healed. Moving his toes in his boot, he gasped again. Applying any kind of pressure to his toes was fresh, fiery pain. Still, he needed to keep the bandages hidden. Having already removed the IV from his hand when he put on his shirt, he wasn't inclined to put it back in. He also hadn't told any of the nurses what he was planning to do, so they'd probably be upset later. Leo didn't care. He was checking out today, regardless of the permission of any doctors, nurses, or quote-unquote medical professionals. His foot would heal with time, and while it did, painkillers would be his friend. He had no desire to continue racking up his own bill. Leaving the general ward behind, Leo limped through the hospital until he reached the neurology ward. The woman behind the counter glanced up as he pushed through the double doors. Madeline was working today, so it was already fourth Sunday. Time really did come to die in a hospital. Madeline smiled at him. Thought you might miss this week. You do have a good reason, Leo. Her eyes were looking him over, no doubt for bandages. Biting down his growl was hard, but Leo forced himself anyway. Of the neurology staff, Madeline was one of the few he liked. She did a good job of checking on people frequently and thoroughly. Does she know? He asked. Madeline shrugged. I didn't tell her. She's been having trouble sleeping the past few nights as it is. Nodding, Leo continued limping down the hall. He stopped just outside a room he could draw from memory, taking a moment to compose himself. Then he strode into the room. His toes protested, but he maintained an even gait as he approached the bed. His mother's eyes lit up immediately, and she held out her arms. Leo! Despite her voice being hoarse and scratchy, it still warmed him better than any coffee. Smiling for her sake, he leaned in to hug her. Even wrapped around her frail frame, his hands almost reached back around to his own armpits. Had she been refusing food? Her hands gripped his back, but he barely felt it through his uniform. Hey, Mom, he whispered by her ear. Her eyes searched his nervously, and it was hard not to notice how stretched the skin around her eyes was. Stopping in on your way to a new case? Leo smirked, pulling out of the hug and resting a hand on her shoulder. Not exactly. Chief put me on forced sabbatical, so I can stay a bit today. Some of her worries seemed to leave. Want me to get you a chair? She joked. If I let you get out of bed, you'll be running down the halls. I don't have the energy to chase you down. They both laughed at his teasing as he pulled up a chair and sat beside her. I thought I felt my big toe this morning, she said, using her arms to turn herself more towards him. Told Madeline she should let me try walking and just see what happens. Leo snorted. 1 toe down, 7 more to go. Yes, well, I figure once the toes are back, it's only a matter of time before everything in between returns. Of course, it was the everything in between that was the problem. There had been no accident, no warning, other than minor numbness and occasional wobbling. 3 years ago, her legs stopped responding. This year, the doctor had insisted she stayed in the hospital. Leo had trouble viewing her room as anything other than an oversized casket. It was only a matter of time before her body attacked something more vital, like the nerves controlling her breathing or her heart. She wouldn't see Leo turn 30. And yet, every visit, she found some new silver lining to share, some little piece of false hope to give her son. No one else visited. Her family hadn't gotten along with his dad while he was alive, so they'd cut ties. Mom didn't want them to know about her condition. She wasn't looking for pity. Even so, she fought to stay strong for his sake. And he had to eat it up, give her a reason to keep fighting. So Leo smiled, as sincerely as he could in a room that reeked of death. Just a bit of physical therapy and you'll be the terror of the ward. His mother smirked, sunken cheeks pulling back to expose more teeth than they should have. I keep asking them to sign me up, but they never do. I think they're just afraid. The desserts in the cafeteria wouldn't be safe if I could walk. Every sentence took several breaths to get through. Leo reached out to rest a hand on her wrist. You've been eating, right? You can't tell? I've gained weight. She grinned mischievously, even as her ears drooped at the corners. Reaching across, she laid a hand on his cheek. You're a good boy, Leo. Everyone should know how to compliment a lady. I'm not as good a boy as I should be, he said, thinking of a dozen opportunities in the last week where he hadn't complimented a woman. In fact, his words to some of the nurses had been rather hostile. Lifting his hand up to meet hers, he pressed it against his cheek, flattening the fur in a pleasant way. Mom, you're dodging the question. Have you been eating? Her grin sagged for a moment, and she licked her lips with a dry tongue. I've been trying, she admitted. Not all of it stays down anymore. Seems that my stomach doesn't like many solid foods these days. You still need to eat what you can. His mother raised an eyebrow at him. Now who's mothering who? Then she snorted, and as normal as the gesture sounded, her voice was still stretched as thin as her cheeks. We need to find you a wife for you to mother when I'm gone. Squeezing her hand harder than he meant to, Leo shook his head. That's not what I want. After a moment's pause and a small smile, his mother ran her fingers against his cheek. Life's not about getting what we want. It's about making the most of what we have. I wanted a family, and I had one. I had a great husband. I've got a handsome boy who's gonna make some lovely woman very happy someday and make more beautiful kits of his own. All things she would never get to see. Leo wanted to hit something, to curse Anima for everything that had robbed his mother of her dream. Multiple miscarriages, Leo's father being taken away from them in a construction accident before Leo hit his teens, and now this disease. The seed mother wasn't watching over their tiny family. Anima was. And Fanina's dark mistress was overjoyed to drown another victim in misery. She must have read the frustration in his face. Leo, it makes me so happy that you're alive and well. Promise me you'll keep it that way, no matter what happens. Leo felt his face contort before he could stop it. He couldn't meet his mother's gaze, couldn't let the visual evidence reinforce the words. They were already heavy enough, dragging him down by his ankles into a thick sludge that was starting to suffocate him. There was one answer she needed to hear. One answer that would give her the strength to keep going, even as his own strength rapidly failed him. The lie had to sustain both of them. Yeah, Mom, I'll do my best. It was like running on quicksand. It was trying to pull him under, and running from the truth only delayed the inevitable. But he couldn't face it. Not when they'd gotten the news about his father. Not now. At least his father had been quick and without warning. There had been shock and grief, but no suffering. But this? Watching his mother deteriorate week after week was torture. It was reality that crept over him, even as he tried to pretend that he didn't already know how things would end. What followed was nearly a minute of pained silence. They simply sat in each other's company, her hand cold, but still alive against his cheek. Finally, she spoke again. How's work going? Cyphus's finest detective? Staying busy? The change in topic caught Leo off guard, but he welcomed it, even if Cyphus's finest detective was a sham. I've got a high-profile case going on right now. Been listening to the news? The native that's been murdering members of the 13? They've got me and Melissa trying to track down the killer. Melissa? His mother's voice cracked, and she had to clear her throat. Yeah, Leo said. Detective McKinley. I remember who she is, Leo. I just thought you two weren't on speaking terms? Leo grimaced. We are, and we're not. It's complicated, but we're kind of patching things up now. Good, his mother said, tugging a bit on her hand. Leo continued to hold it, but let her rest it back on the bed. Her fingers wrapped around his, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his hand. Every once in a while, she caught the spot where the IV had been inserted, but he didn't let himself flinch. His mother gave an approving nod. Always liked her. She's good for you. Shaking his head with a chuckle, Leo wet his lips. Pretty sure I sank that ship a long time ago. We're just co-workers now. We do a lot of foolish things when we're young, but not all wounds are mortal. Leo shook his head more adamantly. I hurt her bad, Mom. So don't do it again. That's the problem. Hurting people seems to be my specialty. Now it was his mother's turn to grimace. Case in point, even his mother wasn't immune to his gift. He smirked ruefully at proving his own point, but his mother rolled her eyes, wiping the smirk right off his face. Leo, everybody hurts people. If you think that's what makes you special, then you're staring in a mirror with your eyes glued shut. His nose twitched, despite himself, so he forced a chuckle. Well, at least if my eyes are glued shut, then I'm spared from the pain of my own appearance. Claws bit into the side of his hand. Not enough to draw blood, but enough to let him know that his mother didn't appreciate his flippancy right now. Leo, you're the spitting image of your father, and if he was attractive enough to land someone as wonderful as me, then you're just as pleasant on the eyes. Between your father and I, you got a double dose. Okay, Leo admitted. So I don't break every mirror I look at, but I... His mother cut him off, cramming more words in with each breath than she had for most of the conversation, her frail frame rising and falling. You're a Steppard, son, same as any of us. Loyal, smart, funny, dependable, and so hard on yourself that you're more crippled than I am. Everyone makes mistakes, Leo. He snorted, gaze trailing to the window. I've made some pretty huge mistakes. He gasped as his mother dug in her claws with more force than he expected. When he glanced at her, she seemed well aware she'd struck a nerve, though she didn't seem sorry. It happens, Leo. And life goes on, so we have to as well. Some mistakes shouldn't be forgotten. Of course not. But they should be forgiven. Emotions welled up in Leo, playing havoc with his face. Not everything can be forgiven, Mom. Some people aren't around to forgive my mistakes anymore. It's a bit hard for a dead person to hold a grudge. Man, his mother was relentless. That used to be something they shared, but he'd learned what relentlessness wrought, and he would never let himself forget. His gaze continued to wander the room, traveling up to the ceiling now. Forming words at a reasonable volume was hard, but he forced it out. I'm not worth forgiving, Mom. That's not what forgiveness is about, Leo. His instinct was to scoff, to offer a flippant reply, but she cut him off by reaching up to grab his chin. Leo, look at me. He couldn't. It was already embarrassing enough letting her see him like this. If he wasn't strong, then how could he expect her to stay strong? This was the most counterproductive use of both their time. She shook his jaw with surprising strength. For a few moments, the weariness in her voice vanished. Leo, look at your mother. He'd cried in front of Melissa. Now he was crying in front of his mother. He cursed Anima again for everything. Then he met his mother's gaze, and his heart broke. He'd braced for judgment. He wanted her to tell him the truth, that he was being a wuss, that he was whining and useless, that he was a disgrace of a son. He'd braced for disappointment. He wanted her to regret what her son had become, to realize that he'd also contributed to her dreams falling apart. But he saw neither judgment nor disappointment in her eyes. Hurt, yes. Pity, yes. No. That was what his mind wanted to see in her eyes. His cynicism couldn't keep its footing in the current of her gaze. It was obvious that she cared about him, that she wanted him to succeed, that she wanted him to be happy. All things that he was good at robbing other people of. Leo, life hurts. And if you don't stop to acknowledge that every once in a while, you're not going to end up in a hospital. You're going to end up in a straitjacket or a body bag. And we can't afford a third burial plot, can we? The words weren't exactly encouraging, but they made him laugh, even through the tears of frustration and self-pity. He shook his head. Not yet. If being police chief comes with a pay raise, then maybe. Her eyes widened. What? Oh yeah, surprise, he said, his voice coming out little better than a monotone. I got an unexpected promotion. Lifting her other hand to her mouth, his mother tried to hide her horror. So Chief Bradburn? Retired, Leo assured her, and she looked genuinely relieved. But he had the bright idea to appoint me as his replacement, which is about the dumbest. He was forced to trail off as she struck him across the cheek. How? If my son's not going to protect himself from those who beat him up, then I'm going to take matters into my own hands. No one beats up my son and gets away with it, and that includes you. Put yourself down within my reach one more time, Leo. I'll bring out the claws. He rubbed at his cheek, giving her a look of indignation that she returned. Just when it seemed that this was going to be the new norm between them, his mother's face softened. Despite the sagging eyelids, taut skin, and drooping fur, she still beamed at him. My boy's a police chief now. Why didn't you lead with that? Leo ran his fingers along the fur at his neck, idly scratching the base with a bit of claw. Still kind of processing it, to be honest. Her joy seemed to fill her with a fresh burst of energy. Wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had all year. In fact, now it was her turn to tear up. Squeezing his hand, she leaned into her pillow in a way that made it look like she just released some great burden. The smile she gave him dealt him another gut punch. You've worked hard, Leo. I know it's been a long 8 years for you, but you've earned it. She squeezed his hand again, voice cracking once more. You've earned this, Leo. Through her grip, he could feel her strength fading. The energy never lasted, so he gave her a smile. She wanted him to be happy about this, to feel proud about himself. The man he saw in the mirror was a lazy, oblivious failure. But the man she saw in him, the man she needed him to be, he was still in there somewhere too, packed away with all the parts of himself Leo feared. You're not going to believe me, but there are better people for the job. Drawing in sharply, his mother let out an exasperated breath. Her thumb brushed along the top of his knuckles. Maybe, she admitted. Maybe. But there's no one I trust more. I'll always do the right thing in the position. Even sitting, Leo felt his knees buckle. How could anyone still trust him after the things he had done as a police officer? All he'd ever done had been motivated by trying to do the right thing, and that didn't always have pleasant consequences. The words of the alchemist teacher replayed in his brain. You are a police officer. If we cannot trust you to do the right thing when everyone else is in the wrong, who can we trust? Her words struck him like a bolt of lightning, striking his very core and illuminating all the skulking doubts and fears clawing at him from the shadows of his mind. Can I trust myself to do what's right? He thought. No. But did it matter? The answer was obvious. If you don't do what's right, who will? How was it that mothers always knew exactly what to say? Though the rest of the visit only lasted another 20 minutes. For those next 20 minutes, Leo thought he might finally appreciate the warmth of a long-absent sunrise.